Welcome to Common Hood. It's your host, Simon P. As usual, I'm with the Conscious Corners, where game is not being taken to the grave by these two gentlemen here. I'm so grateful of that they come on and spend their time in their retirement years, retiring from the system to being more positive with giving some information out. So for everybody else that's of a senior of age, don't waste your time. Do like Kali and do like Dr. Shakur. Take the time when they trying to give out some knowledge. So this ain't entertainment. This is going to be value every time these brothers come through. How y'all doing today, man?
How you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Doing well.
The man.
Simon P. I'm trying to be somebody for my mama. My mama, Betty Harris and Simon Harris, I always love them. They always say, don't disgrace their name. So I'm trying my best not to disgrace my mama and daddy's name, what they put in me. But anyway, I've been following a little thread, and I got this one from a Federalist Project, Papers Project, and there's a African-American guy, Mr. Thomas, I believe Thomas Sowell. And every time I receive this, it always comes from someone that, I guess, conservative Trump lovers or whatever the case may be, MAGA followers. So he thought it was behold to share this with me, which I shared with y'all. And I'm going to read it as such. It says, blacks were not enslaved because they were black, but because they were available. Slavery has existed in the world for thousands of years. White enslaved other whites in Europe for centuries before the first black was brought to the Western Hemisphere. Asians enslaved Europeans, and Asians enslaved other Asians. Africans enslaved other Africans, and indeed, even today in North Africa, blacks continue to enslave blacks. Mr. Thomas Sowell for the Federalist Papers. And when the gentleman that's sending to me says, why we can't get over black slavery as if nobody else has been slaves. What's a response to that?
There has, as long as there have been human communities and conflict between them, there has been slavery. When one group beat another group, they took their territory, their property, and their bodies and enslaved them. But they continued to be considered human beings. When I was in grade school in Detroit, and so I was in first grade in the school year 62, 63. So back when I was in school, when they was teaching about slavery, that came about fifth grade, they called it the peculiar institution. And yet they taught that there had always been slavery, as I just said. And I always asked them, well, what's peculiar about it? There's always been slavery. And they never would answer. I had to learn that later. It was peculiar that the people enslaved were classified as less than human, that it was a permanent assignment, that their future generations, that the child follows the condition of the mother. They said that was peculiar for a patrilineal, patriarchal society like European settlers in these colonies would have the child follow the condition of the mother. That enabled the slave holders to go down on the yard and rape captive women, and those children would be property, not heirs. It was peculiar for those people to never be able to gain citizenship or human status. And they were identified by color. There was a slave auction block at Dubrovnik in the 1100s. That's where the word Slavs became slaves. But they could not enforce and maintain that slavery system because people could escape, blend in, and they were in familiar territory. So to take African captives across the ocean where they did not know the territory, that they were markedly different in appearance, you could automatically tell who was the enslaved person. And that the European colonists had weaponry, had guns. The biggest major contribution of Europe to human world history is the cannon barrel. They took a gunpowder that had been in China for centuries, blowing up stumps and making fireworks, and had the cannon barrel within a decade. So that was Europe's big contribution to the course of human history, having the ability to exert this extreme force against other societies. and used it to march into Africa to take the accomplishments there as their own or destroy them, and to take the people into captivity by declaring that they were something less than fully human compared to a European.
All right. Well, when I read what Mr. Sowell had said about that was all slaves, what stood out to me was that there's indentured slaves and there was owned slaves. So one of the things, I'll let Dr. Shakira comment on this, but you mentioned the Atlantic slave trade transportation, and you said that it was enslaved because of color. But Dr. Sowell here was saying that Europeans enslaved Europeans. However, in America, they didn't use their own kind to slave to come to Americans. What is the reason why they didn't, for that time of building America, why they didn't stick with their own kind?
Well, there's a number of reasons, and there are so many reasons, and all those reasons can be, there's validity to all of them, the different concepts. First of all, there's a little bit different distinction. We know that throughout history, we read in China when emperors were buried, they would died, and they put in tombs. They would take live slaves and what have you, and sacrifice them for the emperor. We've seen this in cultures, the Mayan cultures, the Indian cultures, in Africa, in Europe, and everywhere. As Brother Kali so eloquently stated, we know in warfare. That's why they so-called came up with the Geneva Convention, even though a lot of times it's still not followed. There's situations where men, women, and children were slaughtered in the worst ways. And all nations were responsible. The Americans did it, the Russians did it. What the Russians were accused of raping 1 million women in Berlin when they went into Berlin, but they never talk about what the American troops did. So we've had this situation of human beings, the nature of another human being enslaving or controlling another person to do the work for them. But in the case of the situation with people with black skin, there's a little bit difference, because I mentioned in the comments about when the white Aryans invaded India. This really come with the Aryan superiority and took over the Dravidian black civilization, which was a highly advanced civilization, and usurped that situation, created a caste system to where the black skin was untouchable. That same philosophy then became used again in the world colonization when Europe went throughout Africa and Asia and all third world nations, I'll just use that word, and enslaved and usurped those cultures where they wiped the people out and enslaved the people. They did it in India. If the men had the top knot, they slaughtered and murdered many people in East India. They slaughtered and murdered millions of Chinese. That's when they had the Boxer Rebellion. They did the same thing. We know what they did with the Native Americans with Perazo and other Spanish conquistadors that came into the Mayan, Inca, all through Florida, wiping out those cultures, enslaving the people, killing the people to take the gold and what have you. Now we talk about the continent of Africa as we understand it and know it, where we talk about West Africa and Central Africa, where most of the slaves were taken. One point people don't want to talk about is the fact that brothers fought one another and sold their people to the Europeans at first, because at first the Europeans couldn't even come on the mainland.
But let me ask you this, though. For those this is a problem I had where they say with the African sold that sold to the Europeans. Mm-hmm. I think it gets discounted with how many wars and fights they had with the Africans, that at some point, if you just having a knife and they come up with gun and gunpowder, at some point, to save the tribes, they had to start.
I'm talking about initially. Initially, the Europeans could not even get on the mainland because they couldn't even deal with the terrain. With their white skin, couldn't deal with the heat in the environment. They eventually were able to come in with not only gunpowder, but the Gatling gun was really the way in which they were able to really.
They came in with that, and they came in with the Bible.
There was a lot of resistance up until really really up until the turn
That's
of
what
the
they came
century.
in with.
There was
So
a lot of resistance. The Mahdi destroyed 7 British armies in the Sudan. We had other Mandan Fodio and many other liberation groups that were fighting and beating the Zulu warriors and stuff that beat British armies. It took a long time with advanced military stuff to eventually subdue the continent. Okay, but what I was talking about initially, when the first contacts took place, there was intertribal fighting among our own people. And the reason why I bring this up, a lot of people don't like to talk about that. I know what the Arabs did, and I know what other groups did as far as enslaving blacks. In Mauritania today, there's still slavery there. I have a friend of mine that visited Mauritania, and he said he saw brothers and sisters with chains around their neck. Okay, so it still goes on. Okay, I'm not questioning that. My issue is the concept of us, particularly black people, enslaving and killing each other, because we do it to each other now. I feel that drug dealers are no different than a slave trader. I feel that people engaging in human trafficking are no different than a slave trader. And how many black people sell drugs? How many black people engage in human trafficking? You see, so what goes with the human nature of people today is the human nature of people at that time. There were brothers and sisters that sold their own brothers and sisters out.
but to me that's such a contrast, because you talking about an adult making a decision that I want to get high and take the drug. So that's but in this case, when I mentioned earlier, if slavery was in every race, the difference to me was the blacks that was over here, and maybe the Caribbean as well, they were owned as property.
That's right. And they had rights.
That's the total difference
They had
of it
no
all.
rights. So other slavery people
They were
could get out
owned
of it.
as property.
Because of the religious philosophies and scientific philosophies that weren't necessarily used in the other cases.
Pseudo-scientific.
Yeah, saying that we were genetically inferior and we were cursed by God. Okay, so if you look at the Mormon religion, the Church of Latter-day Saints only recently have taken that out of their doctrine. Before that, they taught that black people could not be in the clergy because of some scriptural
Curse of
saying they were
Ham.
cursed.
Yeah.
Okay, if you look at other groups, the National Alliance, which was a Methodist-based group that combined Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, and other groups, their philosophy is that black people were mud people. Okay, that gave, and we were cursed by God. We didn't even have no soul.
Well, all these things you're mentioning is my point of the ownership. So
But the justification for treating this any kind of way.
Yeah, so
earlier slavery, people could get out of slavery.
But why was the Atlantic, the Atlantic, obviously the Atlantic slave trade with the transportation of Africans to America supersedes the unfair treatment of any other slavery.
That's true.
That gets a lot of more of attention than any other parts of slavery.
That's true.
So this why did you
let me add another point. Well, we know that recently most of the United Nations voted that the Atlantic slave trade was the worst crime against humanity in all of history. The United States voted against that, by the way. But I want to make the point about this point always comes up about Africans selling each other. But within Africa, slavery was just a consequence of conflict, and the human being was still a human being. Even all the way back to Rome, enslaved people could come in as captured soldiers and end up becoming a senator in Rome. Humanity was still retrievable.
That's right. There were rules.
But when Africans sold Africans, they knew that these people were gonna live in servitude, but they still were human beings.
So they thought.
So they thought.
Right.
But when the Europeans came in trying to deal in slavery, they used guns. And this is why it's so important that Europe refined coercion and violence through gunpowder, because they came in dealing guns in a very strategic way. They would come in and give one village just 2 of the most primitive gun they had, a blunderbuss. Then they'd go and give another group 3 of the next generation of gun. So they would keep playing the quality and number of guns interplay, blowing up the conflict between groups, making it more lethal, making every chief know that they had to have guns no matter what, even if the Europeans demanded only people in trade.
Could you elaborate on what Mr. Thomas Sowell was saying, that whites enslaved other whites, but in Europe for centuries before the first black was brought to the Western Hemisphere? Why did the Europeans have to bring the blacks? Just elaborate. What resource did they see to bring? Like, I don't know if going to Africa is very far from the United States. So they wouldn't pack them in the planes. They was packing them on the boats.
Once the Europeans had learned ocean navigation from some Africans, the Moors, they started skipping down the west coast of Africa and exploring things. But on the one hand, they would land and write about how much they admired the opulence and high lifestyle that they observed. And then they would go back home and say, these are subhumans and they have resources we must get. And that was the European outlook.
But the Pope had justified that, because most of the European nations, other than England and then eventually Germany, but all the rest of European nations were Catholic. So they were basically under the control of the Pope. And the Pope was the one to write the edict saying that slavery was okay because blacks were cursed.
And collecting a bounty for the church for each one loaded.
Okay, so we want to add that in there. The difference, Brother Simon, is that other slavery, not only were there rules of how you treated slaves, be it white or black in other civilizations, but the fact that the philosophy that being black skinned mean you were cursed up into the scientific age to where we were genetically inferior did not exist among white slavery. They might have had white slavery, but it was never no philosophy saying that white skin was cursed. Asians might have had slavery, but they did not curse the person's skin color.
So we in agreement that all human races, different ethnic groups, participate in slavery, and it's just part of the human nature. So when they saying that the worst slavery to ever treatment of mankind, are we saying that it's a reason for us to still?
I'm gonna say this.
Keep reminding. Like, for me, this is why, that if that is in the human nature of all, and then the Atlantic slave trade was the worst to ever to be done to mankind. For me, that is why you can't just discount what was happening in slavery over here in America, in the Caribbean islands.
Philosophy. Because none of the other type of slaveries did they say those persons were cursed by God.
And none of the others.
You know what I'm saying? That's the difference.
None of the others were as crucial to those societies. The Atlantic slave trade set the United States on its path to world economic dominance. Yeah. Without stolen African slavery, the United States would be a skinny strip on the Atlantic coast.
But in order to justify that, the Pope, because it was still pushback. How can you treat people like that? There were Europeans and religious people saying that this is wrong. So they have to you have to control a person's mind to treat the way black people, in our previous discussion on lynching, how can you treat a group of people the way in which you treat them? You have to brainwash the mind or convince the mind that what they're doing is God's work.
Is it,
or scientific work?
Being that religion, the Pope was used and the Bible was used, how do you think they use it today?
It's not just the Bible.
The Bible, though. It was a major aspect, because you're saying that they had to control the mindset in order to get them. There was a lot of revolts of slaves trying to get away from the situation.
I'm talking about the people that invoked it, that deal with the slaves.
I understand, but when you take somebody and strip them from their mainland,
right,
and you take them as something totally foreign,
right,
and you come with a bullwhip and a Bible at the same time,
and strip their consciousness of self,
and strip everything from them, it's like, do you have to look at the day and say, should I still be using this Holy Bible in that term, being that it was?
But I want to go somewhere else, though, brother. It's not just the Bible.
But it is a part of it.
No, I'm not discounting that. I'm trying to get somewhere else with you, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
I talked about the Aryan concept, that whole Nazism come out of the Aryan superiority. I taught in the Hare Krishna temple for 16 years. I never was a Hare Krishna. I was the only non-Hare Krishna that taught there. Inside their book, when they describe the different classes of people, they have black people classified as dog eaters. So in Vedic philosophies and other religious books, black is considered evil and demonic.
And yet so many of the deities, if they're not blue, they're black.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, so what happened, they've changed a lot of deities from black to white, but what I'm saying, it is a global viewpoint of black people. They've been conditioned by the British and
Right.
Europeans that we are cursed. See, this is what I'm saying. So why did we get treated, and why did that happen like that? A mind had to be conditioned for me to bullwhip and shoot somebody 20 times or castrate somebody over and over again and be okay with that. We talked about it last week, the slavery, the lynching as a result of slavery.
But do we feel like that nature still exists?
Yes, because the education hasn't changed.
The education hasn't changed.
When you show a white image of Jesus saying that God beget his only begotten son and he looks white, then what are you consciously saying? You're constantly creating superiority. You show a white figure and say, this is God's begotten son that came to save the whole world, and he looks white, then that's saying that white is right.
But it would
Yeah.
be the same brainwash them if they say Jesus was black. They would feel like
But-
it's the same brain. The people that are not black.
The
would feel
book
the
describes him, and earlier historical scholars described the entire population of that area. And if he wasn't Greek and he wasn't Roman, he was not white.
When you show an image over and over again of a certain color or gender being superior in every aspect, that automatically creates superiority in the minds of children that look at that.
Let's-
Especially with no father
Let me
in the
let me,
home.
let me just say this right. Let me say this, Ben, and I have partake with reading the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this in the Exodus part.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever God came in the Bible, it appeared that he came either through the wind,
Carl.
through the fire, through the clouds.
That's right.
So it shouldn't be no image, period.
That's true.
Absolutely.
So with that being said, I just want to get back to the main point that how they're discounting the slavery that was done, that they have said, as Khalid would say, the worst treatment of any human beings ever was done through the Atlantic slave trade. Though there were other slaves that was had, but some says we want to promote that quit feeling sorry and going back into that history. And others are saying, no, we need to make you aware because we don't want this to be repeated.
You don't have a
worst thing.
tomorrow if you don't have yesterday.
Okay.
Nothing is just magically appearing out of the sky. Everything is a result of previous experiences and behaviors.
Okay.
So you have to know where you have been, what you have gone through to deal with going forward.
And you use the word human being.
Mm-hmm.
You got to remember, slaves, black slaves, African slaves in the Atlantic slave trade, the Caribbean, South America, United States, were not considered human beings. This is where, again, I'm talking about the re-education has to take place. Because if we weren't considered human, then people discount the slave trade and the horrors of it, period, because it's not even counted because we weren't even human.
And deaths we're seeing this month show that we're still not considered fully human.
Right.
Native Americans, recently they took it out of the Constitution, but they still call them savages.
Right.
So as long as these groups of people not even considered human are on the same level as you, then nobody has a feeling like how dastardly or how horrible those things were.
We always want to look for a solution. So a solution a solution is mentioned education. What various forms of education look that you think will help others that are?
Well, what color did they say Jesus was in the Bible? Let's start there.
Well, that's one. And I already.
What does it say?
I know-
Hair like lamb's wool and feet of
Then
burnt brass.
that's what should be depicted.
I know what it says, but I also know what it says in one part. So for me, I'm gonna get out of the image part of it.
But we live in an image.
Yeah, but see, but what I'm
society.
saying is we're wrong to influence the image. We know what the books say. So woolly hair is like Queen Elizabeth playing by what's the lady name?
Cleopatra, played by Elizabeth
Yeah.
Taylor.
Yeah.
Played by Elizabeth Taylor. Like,
and Cleopatra the Seventh was
Right.
probably part
So let's
Grecian,
reverse.
part
right. They show the pharaohs on television. They show Tarzan being what I get exactly what you're saying. So the education need to start by, I guess, redoing the images. But I'm pushing you guys for more. Besides the image change, if I change every image that we complain about, make Tarzan black, make Jesus look black,
There's all
make
kinds of
Cleopatra
How
look
about
black.
you took George Washington and made him look black? People would be upset, right?
Yeah,
But that's a reversal. They've taken our images and made them white.
Yeah, changing the image is one way of education. What's the second solution?
That would do most of it right there.
You think so?
We're so image oriented.
Well, along with correcting those images, you are putting back in all the correct elements of history. So our young black folks who are shooting at each other now will look at each other and recognize, oh, we're the descendants of the first people that start civilization.
How will white folks, when they start seeing Jesus being black, the actual color that the scriptures state, even the King James Bible, and all the rest of them give the description. If they put that description in all churches, it would automatically, just by seeing that, change the consciousness. Either a person would stop being a Christian or would force them to have to look at
or perhaps some of those white folks would start feeling better about laying in their tanning beds.
Well, when I read the Bible and had a chance to see the different forms that it's presented, it has good stories within it for personal development.
That's right.
I can't discount it from that.
That's right.
But I can see the imagery is misconstrued a whole lot. But it's like, look who gave you the book. Look who gave you the book.
I mean, the oldest church.
Is the problem. Hold on.
King James.
Look who gave you the book. And it is always documented that they came with the guns and then they came with the Bible. And then when you came with the Bible, they took all your land. Now, I don't know.
That's right. That's true everywhere.
If anybody been over to Africa, you'll see it's very heavily Christianized, and you have to wonder that mindset conditioning is still relevant.
Islam is strong there too, depends on
right, but definitely Christianity is strong. And look who's having wars now. It's Christianity and it is
the Crusades again.
Right. So it's both there. So I think you're saying that the education of changing the imagery would be very important, and then continue to have these talks with brothers as in the conscious corner in order to have more education given of knowing your own history. That's the problem with us. So when they saying taking the history out, we have to keep the comments going. And at this point, I'd like for Khalid just to elaborate on that circle once again to remind.
Well, this book you see in front of you, Africa, Mother of Western Civilization, is one I'm putting forward to start some consciousness-raising community reading circles. I'm going to capitulate a little to Brother Shakur, who has pointed out the deep complexities that you run into as soon as you start reading this book. So I'm going to tell people, get this book, turn to page 375, and read from there to the end. At that point, Dr. Ben is giving history for history's sake. And the first part of the book, Dr. Ben always waxed ballistic about the distortion of history. And so he works that in. He's trying to show you that you must break free of this cage of Greco-Roman origin of civilization, and that it's difficult. It's difficult to change a framework you've believed in a long time, even if it's to your detriment. To give it up is still a challenge. So that you need to be able to look at history as something that's been distorted, and you have the chance to correct it, and you have a duty to yourself to take back your own history.
To show you the importance of imaging, we know that when Napoleon went through Egypt, they shot the nose off the Sphinx.
You mean the horror market? Huh? I'm talking about all that renaming. The horror market becomes the Sphinx.
Okay, I'll say that.
Kemet becomes Egypt. Alkebulan becomes Africa.
But I want to use the words that most people are familiar with.
Absolutely.
To get through a point
That's communication.
Of changing the imagery. Mm-hmm. They defaced many of the statues that showed that the people were truly African. The same thing in the Mayan civilization. Mm-hmm. Okay, so imaging is one of the first stages because children, and I'm thinking about the younger generations coming forth, Brother Simon P., when we talk about changing, we want to begin to bring about a new consciousness. The first thing people look at is the imaging. The picture speaks more than 1,000 words. Mm-hmm. So we have to change the imaging. The imaging they show of African Americans today, especially men, is us being thugs and criminals. And certain type of clothes we wear are considered to be thuggish, which is a lot of times just our culture.
and especially from the ending of Reconstructing Forward, describing black men as sexual brutes who can't wait to rape white women, when all through the enslavement period, it was multiple daily rape after rape. I think that the plantation owners, when they advertised for staff, one of the perks of the job must have been free non-consensual sex as much as you want.
So go back to the original statement. I agree with Brother Sowell, but what he leaves out is the fact that only with us did they create philosophies, spiritual philosophies, and scientific philosophies
I like
to
that.
justify
Pseudo-scientific.
Yeah, but
Right. I like that.
to justify our treatment, wherein the treatment of other individuals, that was never done.
Well, I think we can end it on that note. So those are two things that's pointed out to me. The pseudo imaging that you just mentioned of the scientific of proving that black people were subhuman was never done with the Asians, never done with anybody else, never done with whites, never done with no other race but blacks. And then secondly, just to end with this, that we were owned. They looked at you as property. Property that you was an indenture. Indenture meaning you owed the man some money.
Mm-hmm.
You pay back.
That's that company store game. It's your only option, but it's so expensive your wages can't keep up.
Right. So that's what it is. So I encourage everyone to try to increase their awareness with history. And if you look like me, if you keep saying they're not gonna put it out there, it's up to you to put it out there. It's up to you.
Go back and get it.
So that's what the Conscious Corner is being done with Brother Khalid and Brother Shakir over here. Is they're trying to not take their knowledge to the grave because it ain't gonna do no good when y'all leave.
I'm stay as long as I can.
It's like it's a good recipe. Some people say I ain't gonna show you how to cook that now, and it's like, why won't you show me? It ain't like you owning a restaurant. But they end up taking that to the grave unless somebody was able to copy it and see it, and that's what you guys are trying to say on why the Conscious Corner is formed, for somebody to pay attention, listen, be encouraged by history, and go seek that knowledge and turn it around for yourself. Let's quit waiting. This is Simon P. with Common Hood. We out.